So next is,
Thank you for that answer.
okay. Biggest question I hear from renewals. I didn't change anything on my boat this year. Why did my rating change? Is there an easiest way to figure out from year to year? That one comes up as part of our presentation. It'll be part of this, which I think, is that a handover to you? Is that a reasonable
That's fantastic.
segue?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Moshe Becker. I am the assistant chief handicapper for the non-GTA, although I spend way too much time. I race the J80, so one design stuff, if you want to chat about that. Great club here. Thank you for hosting JFest 2 years ago. Thank you for hosting JFest 2 years ago. So the most important thing that PHRF Lake Ontario does, and you'll unfortunately be looking at the backside of my head a bit, is that we take a lot of data. You talk louder. Oh, okay, I can talk. Yeah, sorry, it's not. That's the problem. So the key thing that we do is we get a lot of data. Diana will tell you how we collect our data. But generally speaking, we go out and grab every race that we can grab on Lake Ontario. The majority of it is club racing. There's some inter-club racing. And being the criminal who owns a one design boat, a lot of our stuff doesn't show up here because it's just ordinal finishes. This boat was ahead of that boat. No timers, because, scorers seem to like not to have to write times down. But it's very, very important. So what we do with all of this stuff is we crunch it through an absolutely horrifically large program. I finally started getting my teeth into the actual programming work. And we come up with something called the Race Analysis Report. And there are actually a whole bunch of them. In my last slide, I'll go over the different versions we have, but I'll stick to this one for a minute. And it's a process that actually starts at the club level because it's the handicappers, it's the scorers at your club that go grab all of the race data, put it in a form, and send it over to PHRF Lake Ontario for analysis. So it's really, really important that you do this. The office actually says, hey, we have a deadline. If you don't meet the deadline, you don't get your $5 back. But, if you have a regatta on a weekend, just send the stuff in. Because if you can spread the load out through the year, we're a lot happier. And the sooner it comes in, there's no crunching at the end of the year. There's no, hey, you had this great regatta. Where are the results? When you're done the regatta, send them in. We love it. So what happens is we go analyze everything. We look at everything boat by boat, but generally it's teed up by class. So we'll have, J80s, CNC 27 Mark Vs, outboard, inboard, and so on. And I wish I could stand up here and do a few more things, but we do this. Yeah, can you zoom that in a bit, Diana? Is that zoomable? Or go back to that slide. I'll finish the. It's an annual process. Everyone asks, why do my ratings change every year? Because we look at them every year. The one thing we've kind of started doing is saying, well, we looked at it last year. Do we have to look at it this year again? So we won't be doing that in the future. Didn't do that this year because why look at something so frequently? We look at 5 years of data. But this week I was clearing out the basement and I have data that goes back like 20 years. It's all online now. Thank you, Diana. And we look at boats in their flying sails configuration and non-flying sails configuration. And we end up having a few little question marks, and I'll explain those. Next slide, please. So if you go look at the summary report up here, you can see the 1D35 with carbon fiber mast. It's a sports boat. Only one of them were raced in this series. I grabbed data from about 4 years ago because the last time I did this presentation, it was really boring. So we look at the weighted average ASP of the boat. So that is the average handicap that the boat sailed against. We look at the calculated ASP. That's what its performance was. Then we look at the number of different boats. One boat, I'll talk about one boat fleets in a little while. Larry brought a good point up. I'll emphasize that. Number of races sailed. So as you can imagine, if we have 50 boats that raced 900 races, that's a great data pool. Our minimum collection is one boat has to race against 3 and has to have 3 races. That's sketchy. Anyone that's done university or high school stats knows small data pools are difficult to work with. The standard deviation, I won't get into the details on that, but it is basically how bouncy the data is. So the more bouncy it is, the more that it might occur by chance. The tighter it is, the more likely it's actual good performance. The calculated difference. So what's the difference between the average ASP and the calculated one? And then we end up putting out a handicap alert. So this particular boat was a little slow in 16, did really well in 18. And when you look at standard deviation, you go, yeah, 18, 21, that definitely was not a fluke. That has some significance to it. And then you go down and go 8 on 19, and you go overall standard deviation of 21. And we do have a report that gives what happens on the whole lake with every boat. And the typical racer is somewhere between 21 and 23 seconds per mile as a standard deviation. So that you have to keep in your head when doing these reviews as well, because you're going, 21 seconds. If someone's sailing at 5, and I had a boat one year, many years ago, that I sailed at, I think, a 5 standard deviation. The rating was rock solid. It just said I consistently sucked. But then you see people who have a standard deviation of 40, but their handicap is 20 seconds per mile under, and you're going, yeah, that was a little fluky. Maybe they just happened to only go out sailing on days when it was super windy and their boat worked great in those, or conversely, they had a great light air boat. Anyway, handicap alert. Can we go to the next page, Diana? Yeah, let's go up. So there are, I think you threw this one in for me. Yeah. So we have a detailed report where we go boat by boat by boat. And you can then go, okay, look at everyone that raced, everyone at every club, and look at everything as a big summary there. And Diana correctly points out that we don't include all of the data. Remember how I said the fluke happens if you have a very wide standard deviation? Well, when it's over 50, bye-bye. And when the difference is over 50, bye-bye. Because what you do, this is pure stats and math, you eliminate outliers. And I'm not talking from the book. I'm talking outliers of data that just don't fit. If you have someone in your club who has like a 53 standard deviation and sailed it, and their boat was rated at 80 and they sailed it at 140, I will bet you that they either didn't have enough crew, just bought the boat, or I don't know, there were barnacles on the bottom and seaweed that, could have made a salad for you or something. Because remember what Larry said, a boat needs to be well prepared. Or even worse, they decided to fly, sails made out of tarpaulins. I've seen it. It's interesting. So the alert criteria, I'm not going to bore everyone on the details. It really boils down to, you see the number of question marks. So the more question marks, the bigger the flag to look at it. So the 1 to 2 question mark stuff, that is to be dealt with in the district. So when we have our district meetings, and I've had the pleasure of being a district chief for a while, we get to sit down at what I call the club level. You have a district meeting, you bring in the handicappers from all of the clubs, and you start asking the questions. How is this person sailing? Were they in a tight fleet? Actually, can we flip to the next slide? Because I think I talk a bit more about that there. Alison, how much time have I got? Oh, okay. I'll do this very quickly. 2 minutes, great. So we go at the club. Well, I'll go over the alert thing, then I'll finish the slide, and then I'm good to go. So there are 4 different buckets that we do alerts in. There's the central council one, and central council is like the final arbitrator. Think of it sort of as being the Supreme Court or, District Court of Appeals or whatever. The districts are the grassroots level where all of the clubs talk between the clubs and so on. Diana gives us a list for our districts, filtered out by all of the boats, who they are, and it's boat-wise, so that we know we can say, hey, how did boat X do at this club? How did boat Y do at this club? Why is this boat always performing at 30 seconds per mile under its handicap, and so on? We also have new class reviews. So after 2 years, we get a new class and go, did we muck this one up? Can we take off the protect the fleet, and so on? And the last one is a handicapper can send a note in, and that's everyone who's a handicapper, and say, there is a boat, I have a problem with it. Can you take a look at it? And generally you want to only do it within your district, because remember, we're observed performance. You can't just say, oh, I heard this boat rates this in, Turkey, and I converted it back to perf, and you're off by a country mile. Next slide, please. So remember, I like talking standard deviations, but reviewing, it is at the district level, as I said. It is people talking about sailing with other people on boats and the performance. One of the things I've been really, really lucky to be able to do is get out to other clubs. Like I've sailed with Hugh, I've sailed with Adam, I've sailed with Sergey. I like getting around the lake, getting on different boats and seeing how they react in other fleets. Yeah, okay. So, as I said, we look at what we focus on there, the standard deviation, history, so on and so forth. And the key thing here, and can we flip to the last page, is we have a lot of boats that are one-offs now, or one of 3, one of whatever. So as I said, the data is difficult. That's why the communication is key. And the other thing is, we are trying to rate boats, not people. So if you have an exceptional sailor, I have one in my basin. This gentleman is 82 now. And I have a hard time getting anywhere near this gentleman's boat with my 80 if I start behind, like 5 minutes or 6 behind him. He's just that good of a sailor. That's the Moss factor kicking in. So if you get a one-off and this person has decades of perennial excellent performance, a well-prepared boat, and so on, you got to keep that in mind when you're looking at how you want to change things. Okay, I'm a minute over. I'll stop now. If you have any questions.
Yeah. Questions.
Oh, yeah. Sergey.
Explaining
Right.
So just sign up with well-known boat.
Yep.
It was known before, had a perf, right?
Yep.
It's a new crew, so results are going.
Yes, I have a
down,
great example of that.
And years after years after years, the results are going up and up and up. Will this boat be changed or not?
That is a really loaded, it's a loaded, it depends question. So it depends on a few things. How much data have we got for this boat? So there were, one of the racers that was in our basin, they owned a boat for 5 years. They were sailing at 30 seconds per mile under its handicap. It changed owner and went to plus 20. So it showed up at Central Council. What's going on here? Oh, new owner got it first year. They eventually brought their handicap down, but we would have to see a trend of year over year performance not being where it was supposed to be. But that is an unlikely situation if there is a history of ownership before and there's depth of ownership. So your own boat is CNC 99. There are a few faster ones in the fleet, a few slower ones in the fleet because they got heavier as they built them. The early ones needed some work to reinforce the bow. But, you know, someone that goes out and sails, we will ask the question. This is why the district meetings are important. Is the whole thing full of biminis, Dodgers, Tupperware, tools to, you know, go cruising in the Caribbean? And we go, yeah, that's not going to change the rating. Just clean out your bloody boat and make it lighter because it doesn't fit the definition of well prepared. So it would be, we look at the data, it's still not performing. Then we have to ask the club handicappers, the owners and that, what's going on with your boat? Because before you owned it, it was doing fine. Now that you own it, it doesn't. So this is what I call the hard conversations of, you think you might be an excellent sailor. You may not be an excellent sailor. And we have gone to the extent of throwing people on other people's boats, inviting crews down to go on their boat, or saying, you come race on mine and I'll see how you do. So it's not just, oh yeah, it'll go up with observation. We ask the questions if there's a history of prior performance.
But primarily what I said was on the previous slide where we had numbers of boats. So J24s, we have a world champion sailing against somebody who's out with the son and daughter, 7 and 8 years old. The deltas between their performance is going to be really wildly different. Should the mom and pop have to come sail to the champion rating or vice versa?
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in two little things there. We do have, you know, this was the summary report. There are 10 reports, flying, non-flying, and all of that, and it gets down to the boat. So when we do reviews in the district, we literally go boat by boat by boat and can say, oh yeah, this was driven by this one sailor. For my own class, it got hit this year because the manufacturer said, oh, it should be faster. And the fleet's picking up, even though the data didn't quite push it out. But in the white sails, I can go, oh yeah, that guy is, you know, best sailor I know. That's why he's performing that way. So you need that knowledge of what's going on in your whole fleet. And the other, another quick one.
No, but let me finish on his point.
Yeah.
Owen sails a J80 and there's a number of them on the lake. And as the J80 sail one design class and more, they all get better. A rising tide lifts all boats. And in one design fleets, that tends to be what happens. Yeah. J boats, as an example, as a manufacturer, gives a fairly accurate suggestion of what those boats should rate worldwide. And we take that into consideration, except J22s and J24s on Lake Ontario have the slowest rating in North America, and the data suggests that we're being kind to them based on the performance. But that's because those two boats both have very large one design fleets that raise the tide of all of them. So we have to compensate or try and address for that for the person who's at 50 point with one boat and doesn't have the ability of trying to catch up to a Chris Doyle world champion or a Rossi world champion in J24s or J22. So that's part of it.
And
there's a question.
I'm gonna take a question and throw in one little other thing. Even though we have a lot of boats that are like one-offs and all of that, we do have tools from other rating systems to help get them in the right bucket. But it's that old analogy of what looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, is a duck. So if you go, oh, these are all Rob Ball designed CNCs, we've rated them for 30 years. It doesn't matter if only 2 of them are still sailing. We kind of know what's going on with them because we can dig it up. So it's less of an issue than that graph might have suggested. So questions.
So Tony's got a question. Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Hi, my name anyway. My question is two parts. One is the overall methodology that you use works great if you have a good number of boats. I mean, it's a statistical deviation based assessment. But if you're the only boat in the entire system of that class, I cannot see how you can use that method. And as you know, I've appealed my handicap for, I think this is the fourth year. I haven't rewritten it, but my handicap has jumped back and forth enormously based simply on my race performance, and it's got nothing to do with my boat. So I don't know how many Blue Nose 23s you've got in your system, but I checked with the guys I know. I'm the only one. Can you explain how you deal with one boat statistically?
Yeah, well, you answered the question in your question. You said we rated the performance,
That's right.
and that's what we look at is the performance. The fact that there's one boat gives us performance of one boat to base it on.
Plus, you look at different areas, you look at how similar boats perform, and you look at how the general fleet composition is. And the other thing to remember is nothing prevents a club from mucking around and providing a club racing handicap or club specific. So if you think you're being unduly treated by PHRF, you can go out and talk to your club handicapper and make your case and maybe get a different rating.
So the other piece, and this is the piece nobody likes to hear.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear it, and ideally I'll repeat it 15 times. If you sail to your rating, you should finish mid-fleet. To win, you have to sail faster than your rating, and to come last, you have to sail slower than your rating. Somebody who's pretty good at math and computer calculations could take all the data and compress all the numbers and give every boat a rating that said every race that they finished, we all finished at exactly the same time in a corrected time. That doesn't always happen because some days you're going to perform better than your rating based on conditions or who's with you, and some days slower. But bear in mind, if you sail to your rating in a 7-boat fleet, you should finish fourth. If you finish third, you're sailing faster than your rating. If you're finished fourth, you're sailing slower than your rating. If you're finishing first, you're sailing faster. And we will eventually, the system on observed performance should make some corrections up and down to meet that. And maybe it's not as fast as people wish, but that's kind of where that goes. Okay.
Another question?
Paul.
Yeah. I'm just going to throw in, we also look at what happens in other fleets where there's a lot of data, because you've got what I call peg boats. So I love One Design J boats and, take your list, because at the end of the day, they get treated reasonably consistently globally.
So we have one more question from the Zoom, and we have a question here in the room. So we'll take the Zoom one and then we'll take the room one. Paul?
Hi. Given that the boat is the same manufacturer and the difference between the two boats is shoal draft versus standard keel,
Yes.
How do you adjust for SD? As we know, in most cases, SD is heavier, the keel is bulkier, and as a result cannot point as high upwind.
So
I have not finished the question, please. It cannot point as high as standard keel. In addition, a heavier boat, the SD is more sluggish in lighter winds. Please advise, how do you resolve that in your rating?
So our ratings, we revised our keel process last year, and we will be working on a project to revise all of the ratings based on what the keels look like. We have a lovely chart with 15 different keel configurations as opposed to our old 6 or 7. And we have put in revisions for everything on that. And once that's through, we will have observed performance. The biggest difference that's been kicked into this particular process, it's all in the handicapper's manual, and it's all done by a simple, does it look like this? And it has side and forward profiled, so you can see where the weight is on like a deep T bulb or whatever. And the adjustments will be carried through over time. So it's purely a identify, rating, adjustment. The biggest one that's come out of this is there are a lot of boats that have a long, thin, narrow keel. Like I rated a Tanzer 29 shoal draft, and it wasn't a wing. It was just a long keel. That actually has no rating difference between the fin.
Okay, so question in the room.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thanks, Larry.
Yes. Do we make a distinction when we're looking at boats ratings, whether the boat and the skipper is doing interclub or our lake races versus what we might call house, which is at your own club? Do we do that?
Yeah, Hugh, we end up looking at our data generally collects everything from windward, leeward club races in the evenings. That's why we have a different AB formula than the US and why we're using the alternate formula for point to point. But we do look at all the interclub work, and we do publish the data of purely interclub. And what jumps out at you there is people tend to use beer can crews, their friends, family, whatever, for club racing. They use the sails that they've had for a few years, and then you can see them go to an interclub event and they either get their rear end kicked because now they're, going up against some keeners, and people then show up with their better sails and stuff like that. I confess to doing that readily on my one design boat, but that is where you see these things pop out. And we look at those too, because we can go, oh, they seem to have been sucking a bit of club racing. Oh, they've gone to interclub. Yeah, they are really performing. So it isn't the boat that's the problem. It's who's on the boat.
All right. So as I said, as a result of that, I've been asked to talk a little bit about race management. Before I do that, however, I'd like to clarify something that I gave in my earlier chat, since other people jumped on. The handicappers worksheet that I discussed about, when I talked about having that all tabs filled in and make sure you keep it all up to date and what have you, let me add to that working with your district chief to do all that. In each district, everybody's going to handle it differently based on geography and skill sets. There will be some handicappers who will just be given a copy of it, said, on your honor, just use this, need it when you're done. Others, it'll have to go through the district. So based on your location, your mileage may vary. There's no hard and fast rule. We work hard to make we're all volunteers. So we're going to do whatever we can to do the best. Okay, now on to race management. Classes. It's a race category is what you can think about it. It can be split up into two basic ones. One of them is flying sails. The other is non-flying sails. A lot of times people will call flying sails. I'd say, oh, that's the spinnaker boats. Yes and no. Flying sails does not mean spinnakers. Spinnakers are flying sails, but all flying sails are not necessarily spinnakers. So you have to keep an eye on that one. And later on, when we talk about free flying head sails and a few other things, there's going to be some variations on that. May not be very apparent now. It is coming down the pipe. So get your head wrapped around. Flying sails is that way. The other one, non-flying sails, is, well, the other group. People call it jib and main, jam, white sail, slow boats, some people call them, although you can sail faster without a spinnaker sometimes. Now, that's the two main groups that we have for PHRF. Then we break it then at the club level or your event level, it'll get further broken down into what I would call divisions. These are subgroupings to try and keep similar boats together to make it fair. As it says right there, if you can keep your SPs or your ASPs, I should say, if you can keep your ASP to within 30 seconds a mile, that's pretty good for club racing. If you've got a big club and you can get more granular, it's much better to be at 20 seconds per mile. You're getting pretty close. And of course, if you can have all the different types of boats, but you can be equal at the ASP, then that is effectively level racing, which after one design is probably the best you're going to get. But the reality of it is now, why do we say the time differences keep the groupings? Unfortunately, no matter how hard we try, the wider the time differences with perf, it is harder for it to totally compensate for that one. So if you've got people who are racing 120 seconds apart, it's not going to be that great. Having said that, every event, every club has your restrictions, has your limitations. Do what's best for you. Yeah. As Larry's kicking in with that, yeah, for example, the setting sun on your midweek racing, he says Wednesday, but my club races on Thursday, so I don't know how Wednesday applies. As I said earlier on, yeah. The sunset comes down, winds eventually die, so your bigger boats, your faster boats will finish hopefully faster. But then the time difference happens there. There's a whole bunch of fun that can go into the Q factor and what the values are based on what time of day you're racing and how far you're going, which I will not be discussing because that is way too complex to get into for here. So PHRF is basically a class rule. Like I said, PHRF is a class, just like one design classes. Everything that you do has to comply with PHRF, like Ontario. If you've got one design boats, J24s, for example, one design boats can also race under PHRF. When they do that, they're racing as a PHRF boat, not a one design boat. This gets a little confusing because later on, because people will say, wait a minute, what about one design certificates? One design certificates are to help the handicapper in taking measurements. If you have a class legal boat, we have taken what is the largest theoretical sail that that boat could have, handicapped it accordingly. And if the applicant, the owner says, I want to race one design, my one design boat as a one design class boat, we will just take those standard numbers. We will not measure your sails. We're going to presume that you are legal to your class. If you're slightly smaller in your sails, that's so sad. We're not going to take care of that. If you want to go with a PHRF certificate, the full thing, full measurements, yes, you can do that one. So you're racing as a PHRF boat. So all the other things apply about placement of equipment, stuff you can and cannot put on the boat as shipped. So everything happens that way. So one design certificates does not mean that you are racing under your one design rules. It is to gather measurements for certificate purposes. Got that? A lot of people get tripped up on that, including myself at the very beginning. And I'm about to be corrected. Yes, Owen. If your flying sail is under 75% anchor, don't use it because it doesn't comply with. Well, that's okay. For those of you who were not hearing that on the microphone, Owen just wanted me to clarify a little bit on the item. If your one design class has a spinnaker that is horribly undersized according to PHRF, remember earlier on I said we presume you have a 180% spinnaker when we set our, I think, for our base. If you are smaller than that, use it. Remember. Or you know what, we're not going to get, I'm getting several people telling me to, oh, go with this measure, don't worry about that measurement. I'm not going to get into measurements right now. I'm here to talk about theory, not specifics. It just, we haven't got the time for that. But basically, watch your sails. If it's too small, you can do it. And yes, last thing on that one, I actually had a competitor when I was still in Toronto. Member of my club, he had two sets of sails. He had his Laser 28 class sails, and he had a set of sails got for PHRF to maximize his boat under PHRF. And he used his PHRF sails for club racing and other stuff. He only used his J his laser 28 sales for laser 28 events. That caused a lot of confusion because everybody said his sales are different. Yes, he was racing under perf. Yes, this is allowed. Alrighty, requirements when you're racing with perf. As I mentioned, you use your standard configuration, no modifications as manufactured. And to expand on statements made earlier, yes, if you have optional gear that you have put on that you want to remove to adjust your weight, go right ahead. But stick with what is shipped. And of course, you have to have a valid PHRF LO certificate. If you don't have a valid one, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Alrighty, so in the group, what's happening? The club handicapper is the first level of support, your first line of defense, the pointy end of the spear, whichever way you want to put it. They are your club rep. They represent PHRF LO to the club, and they represent the club to PHRF LO. Their job is to assist the owner in taking measurements, what have you. From its initial conception, PHRF is a honor-based system. Since we, as sailors, we are all 100% honorable. The theory is the owner takes their own measurements. The reality of it is the handicapper will usually assist because people don't always follow it correctly. But it's the owner who signed up and says this is correct. The other function of the handicapper is to interpret the PHRF LO class rules. And as well as the big one, advise the scorer or your results person what the boat's ASPs should be. They'll provide them so you can do the calculations. Now, those of you who use different programs, if you're using time on time, your program, if it's Sailwave, if it's yacht scoring or what have you, there's what they call an A and B value that you can plug into your formulas. Make sure that you provide your results person with the correct values. The defaults that come out are the ones that came out originally many moons ago from US Sailing, 650 over 550, I think it was. A number of years back, there was a really serious analysis. And again, as going back to the earlier point of when the sun's setting, wind conditions changed a little bit, that is why PHRF LO numbers for the A and B factors are slightly different. It tries to compensate for this. It does its best to compensate for it. It's never 100% correct. But hey, they are in the book. I'm not going to recite them off the top of my head because I always get it wrong. I always have to read it myself. Okay. So we have that. So it's important. Always make sure that you get your correct numbers in there. Okay. Other things. Enforcement of PHRF LO class rules. We are guided by the racing rules of sailing, just like everybody else, which means any issues that people have as a result of an invalid certificate, for example, are resolved by a protest committee. The handicapper is not on the hook to make decisions and assess penalties. Corrective action, different story. Penalties, if there's a protest, that goes to a protest committee. And the handicapper is there as a resource to the protest committee to interpret the PHRF LO class rules as they apply. So if it's an invalid certificate, somebody says invalid certificate, they would come in and say, yes, this is correct, or we will remeasure, we'll verify. Again, they are the resource to the protest committee. They are not the decider. We have a technical committee. Racing Rules Sailing, 92, introduced the concept of a technical committee. Previously, people were known as measurers, handicapper, and handicappers were effectively a class measurer. The technical committee, if you're a handicapper, you are a part of the technical committee. Hopefully, it is not a committee of one, but it sometimes happens that way. You are a peer at the peer level to both the race committee and the protest committee. All right, so that's your level of authority. The key here is if somebody has to be protested, for example, an invalid certificate, you as the handicapper may be doing it on behalf of the technical committee. Remember, you're not the protest committee or the race committee. So as the technical committee, you may file a protest, or a competitor may file a protest. It's all up to them. So, which takes me into my last slide, which is, as I said, anybody can protest. And it's usually on the certificate thing. If somebody says, well, your results are wrong, I think that your rating is wrong. Well, that becomes the part that was discussed earlier, where we go through our annual analysis. There is an appeal process that you can file through the system, through the handicapper, through the district review. That can be done. But as far as a club racing level, if the certificate is valid according to measurements taken, then it's a valid certificate. So as I said before, the technical committee does not hear the protest. As I said, because you may be filing the protest, you could be a party to the protest. You're there to interpret, and you may need to remeasure.